You lived a whole life before you turned 3. You cried your first cry, heard your mother's voice for the first time, tasted milk for the first time, crawled, stood up, fell down, then spoke your very first word. And yet you can't recall a single moment of it. The obvious answer is that your brain was just too young back then, not developed enough to hold on to anything. But the truth is stranger than that. Your infant brain wasn't failing to record your life. It was recording everything. The real problem is something else entirely. Something inside that same brain was quietly erasing what it had just written down, a gap everyone shares. In 1905, Sigmund Freud was the first to put a name to this: infantile amnesia. But here's what makes it even stranger. Infants can absolutely form memories. That's not a guess, it's been proven. Back in the 1980s, psychologist Carolyn Rovey Collier at Rutgers University ran a clever experiment. She tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile hanging above the crib. Within minutes, the babies figured it out. Kick, and the mobile shakes. They loved it and kept kicking. Days later, when placed back in the same crib, they started kicking immediately. No reminder needed. 2-month-olds remembered for several days. 6-month-olds remembered for weeks. So the infant brain can learn, store, and recall just fine. But somewhere along the way to adulthood, all of it vanishes. For decades, scientists couldn't explain why. Reason 1. A construction site still under development. The first part of the answer comes down to brain structure. The hippocampus, a small, curved structure buried deep in the brain, is the machine that builds memory. It's what takes a vivid experience, a birthday party, a conversation, a walk in the rain, and turns it into a movie you can replay in your head later. In adults, the hippocampus works together with the prefrontal cortex to label, store, and retrieve memories on demand. But in infants, that whole system is still under construction. The wiring between the hippocampus and the cortex is still being laid down piece by piece. One key region, called the dentate gyrus, which acts as the gateway for new memories coming in, doesn't finish wiring itself until around age 2 to 4. In simple terms, an infant's brain can create short-term memory, but it doesn't yet have anywhere to file it away for the long haul, not the way an adult brain does. But that's only half the story. The other half is where it gets really strange. Reason 2. Growing up is what erases the memories. In 2014, 2 neuroscientists in Toronto, Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Frankland, proposed an idea that sounded almost backwards. What if the very process of building the brain is also what's destroying its memories? In the first few years of life, the hippocampus produces new neurons at a staggering rate, a process called neurogenesis. This is essential because those new cells are exactly what wire up the neural circuits you'll rely on for the rest of your life. But the 2 researchers suspected this comes at a cost. Every time a new cell wedges itself into an existing circuit, it disrupts the old connections already living there, the very connections holding on to memory. To test it, they turned to mice. When they sped up neurogenesis in adult mice, the mice started forgetting things they'd just learned. When they slowed it down in baby mice, the babies held on to memories far longer than normal. The results were published in Science, and they pointed to a conclusion that flips the common assumption on its head. Your infant brain wasn't bad at remembering. It was just busy growing. The very explosion of new brain cells that built your mind is also what buried the memories living inside it. Your earliest experiences didn't disappear because they were never saved. They disappeared because your brain kept building new rooms, and building new rooms meant tearing down old walls. Reason 3. When there was no you yet to remember. There's one more layer to this, and it might be the strangest part of all. To have what scientists call autobiographical memory, the kind where you're the main character in a story you can replay in your mind, you need something most people take completely for granted: a sense of self. You have to understand that you're a separate individual from the world around you, that things are happening to you, not just a stream of sensation drifting by with nobody behind it. In the late 1990s, developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage argued this was the missing piece. Before roughly 18 to 24 months, infants don't yet recognize themselves as a separate being. There's a classic test for this, and it's simple. Put a dot of red on a baby's nose, then set them in front of a mirror. Before 18 months, the baby looks at the reflection like it's a different kid entirely, never reaching up to touch the mark on their own face. After 18 months, everything changes. The baby reaches straight for their own nose. They understand the child in the mirror is them. And that milestone, the moment a child first recognizes themselves, lines up almost exactly with the earliest age autobiographical memory can even begin to form. In other words, you can't remember being a baby partly because back then there wasn't really a you yet, not in the full sense. No one was sitting behind your eyes, narrating your experiences into a story that belonged to a specific person. Which raises a genuinely unsettling question. If you had no continuous sense of self back then, and the brain that once held those early experiences has since rebuilt itself so completely it no longer resembles what it was, is the baby in those old photos actually you? Or is that someone else entirely? Someone who lived in the same body but whose mind was taken apart and rebuilt, neuron by neuron, into the person you are now? Reason 4. Language is the frame memory hangs on. There's one last piece. Language. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson spent years studying how children form memories that actually stick. Her conclusion? Language doesn't just describe memory. It builds the scaffolding memory needs to exist. Before you could talk, every experience you had was just raw sensation. Sounds, textures, feelings, flickers of light. But without words to organize them, those fragments had no frame to hold on to. They just drifted through and vanished. Once children start talking, especially once they start talking with adults about things that already happened, things like, "Remember when we went to the park?" Their ability to hold onto long-term memories jumps dramatically. Language works like a skeleton for memory. Without it, experience is like water poured out with no cup to catch it, there for a moment, then gone. And this isn't just theory. Cornell psychologist Chi Wong found something fascinating. The age of a person's earliest memory actually shifts depending on the culture they grew up in. In Western countries, where parents tend to retell their kids' stories back to them, asking questions, building a personal narrative around each child, the earliest memory usually starts around age 3.5. Among the Maori of New Zealand, where oral storytelling traditions place huge value on personal history, the earliest memory reaches back even further, to around age 2.5. Meanwhile, in some East Asian cultures, where childhood stories tend to focus less on the individual, the earliest memory typically starts later, closer to age 4 or beyond. It sounds hard to believe, but the culture you grew up in actually shapes how far back your memory can reach. So what actually happened? Your hippocampus wasn't ready to build long-term memory yet. Then, even once it started working, a wave of new neurons tore apart the very circuits holding those memories. You didn't have a sense of self yet to anchor experience to. And you didn't have language yet to give those experiences a frame sturdy enough to last. It wasn't one single cause. It was all of this happening at once. Everyone who has ever lived goes through this. Every single person you've ever met carries this same blank space where their earliest years should be. And the answer isn't that the infant brain was too simple, too underdeveloped. It's that back then, your brain was busy doing something far more important than remembering. It was turning you into you. And to pull that off, it had to almost completely dismantle the person who existed before. If this video just made you look at your baby pictures a little differently, drop a comment and tell us the earliest age you can actually remember something from. And if you're into uncovering the strange truths hiding behind the brain and human history, hit subscribe to Stickwise Chronicles so you don't miss what's next.